right, so we've been meditating on my situation is his sanctuary. We saw Joshua the last week carrying our worship into the battleground. We're going to go further today. Growing up, in my growing up years, I've heard this saying that men don't cry. I see a lot of men here tonight. So have you heard that before? Men don't cry? I beg to differ on that, because all through my growing up years, no matter what went wrong, big or small, I've always cried. I'm a crier, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I've cried in many situations in my life. And there are other situations in my life where I have faced victories, I've been successful, and these two end of spectrums, these two extreme conditions are the situations that I remember God the most. When I'm crying, I'm like crying out to God and asking for help, asking God to intervene, asking God to step into my situation, and I'm really crying. My tears are flowing down. And there are the other situations where I'm thanking God, praising God for all the good things that He has done, all the victories that we are going through. So there are two extreme situations. But what about the ones in between? Think about it. When two extreme situations happen in life are the most times when we actually go to God. When you're faced with a battle, when you're faced with a problem, we run to God very quickly. Or when something really nice is happening in your life, you are jumping up and praising God and worshiping. But what about the things in between, when you don't have a battle to face? When you don't have anything that is stirring your heart? When you are not faced with an exam, when you're not faced with an appraisal, when you're not facing a relationship breakup, when nothing exciting seems to be happening or nothing anxious seems to be happening, what about the situation there? Psalms chapter 34 verses 1, it says, I will bless the Lord at all times, and His praise will continually be in my mouth. I want to pause here for a minute and break that verse down. When the psalmist begins the Psalms by saying, I will bless the Lord at all times, he's taking ownership. He's saying the pastor doesn't need to really stir my heart or push me to worship. He says, I will. It's a voluntary action. And he says, bless the Lord at all times. Bless and the Lord. It is my response to the source. The Lord is my source, and my response is that I will keep praising Him. And he goes on to say, at all times. At all times. Not at the extreme situations, not at times when I am pushed into praising God, not at times when I am facing with a battle, but at all times, no matter what happens or no matter what never happens in my life. At all times I will praise Him, and His praise will continually be in my mouth. Pause a little at that word praise. It's not just a heart meditation. It's not just a grateful feeling that you go through. Sometimes we are very eloquent when we come to church, right? We don't want to be loud. We don't want to be vocal about our thankfulness to God. But I believe what the psalmist is actually pressing upon at that point is, at all times, I am going to speak of His praise. Many places in the word, the psalmist says, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. Have you read that verse? Shout unto God with a voice of triumph. He's a very vocal person there. He's trying to stir our hearts to not just be grateful, but our lips to be loud enough to bring our praise to God. And he tells us that it has to be a continual process at all times. That's what I want to impress upon this evening. At all times. No matter what situation you are going through. Maybe you are just having just another day at office, just another day at home, just another day at college. Nothing much is happening. Then what are you doing? Is your situation still your sanctuary? That's where we sometimes let go of the worship. That's where we sometimes waver and go away from the presence of God. It is that situation where nothing happens that prepares you for a time of battle. Last week we spoke about Exodus chapter 33, verses 11, I believe, where even when Moses left the tent, Joshua dwelt in the tent. You know what you must notice about that verse is that there was nothing happening when Joshua was still in that tent. It's not about whether you worship during an eventful time in your life. It's not about whether you are actually looking at God and focusing on Him when things are at a high or at a low in your life. It's about what is happening when nothing is happening. Are you following me? How much of worship is your life when nothing is eventful? How much of your situation is His sanctuary? I said this the last week. The unceasing desire of His presence will cause His presence to never cease from your life. The unceasing desire of His presence will cause His presence to never cease in your life. It's not just about the battle time or the victory time. It's about everything that is in between. Daniel chapter 6 verses 10. Let me read that for you. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. Now the last phrase is what I want to underline. Just as he had done before. You know, notice this, that Daniel is not in a state of power yet. He and his friends have been carried as captives into Babylon. They do not yet have the power to decide what they want. But Daniel has this practice. Daniel has this continuous clockwork thing going in his life, that he would go into his room, open the windows towards Jerusalem and pray 3 times a day. Nothing could stop him. His enemies could not stop him. His schedule did not stop him. His slavery bondage did not stop him. His captivity did not stop him. Nothing stopped his prayers. It kept going every day. Sometimes when the rains come down hard, we think twice about going to church, correct? We don't do that about our work. We don't do that about going to school. Even if it's raining in the morning, we push our children to go to school. And we're worried when we want to take an off, my pay gets cut. But what about your worship and your sanctuary? A little gloomy, I fall asleep. A little untoward situation, maybe I don't want to go to church. But look at David. His sanctuary is his everyday. Every normal day. No matter what happens, whether he's in a difficult situation, whether he's not in a difficult situation, he is continually praying and praising God. And that's what I want to impress upon our lives this evening. If you want to carry your worship into the battleground, your regular situation must turn into a sanctuary. Amen? Are you with me? If you want to see God arriving at your battleground before you arrive there, your everyday situation must turn into a sanctuary. Daniel is faced with the lion's den. He is faced before the king. He has everything going wrong for him, but he does it regularly like he is doing. A few days ago, I was caught up with a situation with the government officials, and it needed a lot of our attention and a lot of our work and a lot of our focus on that. You know, the first thing that happened in our minds was, how am I going to solve it? It's not about, we didn't think first about how God will help us through it. The first thought that came to our minds was, how am I going to solve it? Whom should I contact right now? How much money should I keep aside right now? How quickly must I get this going? But then, that was when God was speaking into our lives, and He was saying, first our knees must go down before we stand up in front of anybody else. Before we prepare for anything else, we must prepare for the sanctuary in our life. And I believe as much as we can kneel down and we can bow down before God, He will stir our hearts and He will strengthen us to stand before anybody else. If our knees are prepared to be bent before God, and if we are bringing our situation and turning it into a sanctuary, God will surely prepare us and strengthen us to stand before anybody and anything else. And we realized that. Through the process, we realized that. The more we kept God ahead of us, the more situations was turning in favor of us. Now, I'm not saying that to convince you that victories will come your way, so go down and turn your situation into a sanctuary. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not proposing that. What I'm saying is, whether you fail or you succeed, whether you have a victory or you have a defeat, let your situation turn into His sanctuary. Amen? Come down to Daniel chapter 3. We read about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. How many of you know this three people? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Anybody? Anybody? Yes? Can I see some hands? Anybody? Yes? 1, 2, 3. Yes? Those of you who know, who have read the Bible will know about this. These three people are none other than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How many of you know this now? Now everybody knows, right? So the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Babylonian names given to Hebraic people. The moment they're carried from Babylon, their names are changed and they're given different names. But the people didn't change. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did not change. They continued being the godly people that they were. And they are put into a situation where they have to bow down before this big idol or a statue that is created. And when the time comes, there is a specific time, and when the time comes, everybody in that town have to fall down and worship at that idol. But these three, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they do not want to do it, and they don't do it. So the king threatens them. I'm going to put you into a furnace and burn you down if you don't do it. But they say, no, we're not going to do it. Now the situation is this. Many times in our life, we have the God, we have our God, and then we have many other idols. We turn our situation into a sanctuary, but also there are other idols in its place. For Joshua, it was his sword. Have you wondered? For Jacob, it was his sneakiness. Have you thought about it? For Moses, it was his anger. For Samson, it was his pride. For Judah, it was his erotomania. Now for you and me, what is it? Many times, we are only conscious about the religioustic idols in our life. The religious idols in our life. We are not bothered about the other things that have displaced God from our life. So much so that God has been dethroned and somebody else has been enthroned there. We must know to keep the main thing the main thing. And Daniel knew that. The pursuance of His presence permeates our present. Pastor Prem said this a few weeks ago. The pursuance of His presence permeates the present. If your present need to be occupied by God and His presence, then the pursuance of His presence must be diligent in your life. It must be diligent. Nothing must shake that away. The moment you cool down a little bit, the moment you start taking a back seat about the presence of God in your life, the moment you deviate a little bit from the main thing, Daniel knew to do that. He knew to keep the main thing the main thing. He knew he was diligent in focusing on what he had to do every day in his life. Babylon could not shake him. King did not shake him. Captivity did not shake him. Threats did not shake him. The lion's den did not shake him. Nothing could shake him. And the more important thing is that for Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, they bind him up. They bind them up. And two people take them towards the fire. And they threaten them again. And they say, now, I'm going to give you one more chance. Are you going to listen to me or not? The king says. But Daniel chapter 3 verse 16, it says, King, we are not going to contend to what you have told us. These knees of ours will never bow to anybody else. These lips of ours will never acknowledge anybody else other than our God. In our life, in my situation, there is the God. But is it the only God? That's the question I'm laying before us. As they take these three towards the fire, the people who are taking them get burnt out. The ropes that have been tied around them get burnt out. And just as they drop inside the furnace, three become four. The unseen becomes the seen in the furnace. You know, many times we are worried about where is my God when I'm going through the situations. Many times in our daily life we expect God to show up like a miracle or a magic and do miracles every day for us. But God is perfect in His timing. The Bible says, at the point where they threw them into the fire, three became four. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not have a choice there. Point number one. Number two, they did not know if God was really going to show up there. Point number three, they did not know if they were going to survive to see if something was going to happen at all. You know, yet they did not move from their faith. Yet they did not move from their faith. None of these things that were against them, all the odds against them, did not move their faith at all. They were focused on one thing: my situation will be my sanctuary, even if my God does not save me. Amen? How many of us can keep that in our life? Not just about situations when we are in situations like fire. Not about just those situations when we are thrown into the den of lions. Not just when we are thrown into the deepest waters. Not just when we are facing a mountain. Not just when we are going through the valleys. If you are expecting God to show up at those times, my everyday situations must turn into His sanctuary. Many times we have seen a lot of us crying to God for help when we face battles. We see many people turning up to churches only when there is a need, or probably only when there is a celebration. Many times we see people seeking God and seeking God's presence only when there is a battle that is coming ahead of them. Only when there is a brokenness in their life. Only when there is a need for an answer in their life. But for all that, for God to show up at that situation in your everyday life, are you experiencing the presence of God? Let my boat rock. Let the furnace be heated up. Let the lions in the den be hungry. Even though he slay me, like Job, we are going to acknowledge and say, yet will I trust in him. How many of us are saying that with me tonight? Even though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will continually be in my mouth. How many of us can with conviction really acknowledge that and say, yes, I will never cease my worship from my God, in my everyday life. How many of us can really say that? How many of us can acknowledge and say, nothing can take away the worship from my mouth, no matter what I'm going through? Nothing can break my rhythm of my praise to my God. Or can my captivity do that? Can my career do that to me? Can my worship stop because of the brokenness that I'm going through? Can my praise cease because of the present that is stirring my life away from God? What can move you away? Or will your sanctuary continue for God?